Today we are going to talk about kaput, but I want to talk about it in the terms of what our toolbox is for dealing with wild pigs. I may not have answers for every question you have, but I am going to try my best, and I am going to give you all the information we have available to us in the state of Texas. Kaput is a feral hog bait that is warfarin-based. So warfarin is the active ingredient in the bait. And it has recently been given a label for use in Texas. He got that label in February of this year. The 87th legislature directed an evaluation of kaput by Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and after a 2-year study, it was found to be effective. Just like any other herbicide or pesticide, the label is the law. It was registered by EPA in 2017. Again, Texas gave it a label in 2024. And it is a state limited use pesticide, which means you are required to have a state applicator license in order to use it. Something that is a little bit different about this pesticide from some of the other ones is that there's also a manufacturer required training. That training, you can access that training by going to whatever vendor you buy it from. They will give you a QR code or a website to go to in order to do that training. A little bit more on the label, some of the things we like to highlight. It is only for use on pigs. So there's no other animals for this one. It's only for feral pigs. You do not put the bait in water. So you don't want to put it in a tidal zone, surf water, and be careful when cleaning and disposing of it because the water can break the bait down. It must be distributed using an approved feeder. I will talk a little bit more about that approved feeder in a couple slides. And probably the biggest thing that I like to focus on with this label is that surveillance is required. Not only by the label, but if you want to be successful in using it. So the moment you decide you want to use kaput, and you start conditioning pigs, baiting pigs, and then post-conditioning, surveillance of that feeder and the bait site is required. They found in the study that to be most successful, you should surveil it at least once a day, but every 2 to 4 days is what is asked for on the label. It is for use in pastures, rangelands, forests, and non-crop areas. For the definition of non-crop areas, you should talk to your TDA representative or agent in your area. Do not allow livestock to graze in baiting area. So you should either remove the livestock from the pasture or you're going to need to fence the area in so that livestock cannot get to the bait site. And then properly dispose of carcasses in accordance with state laws. And that is under their status as free-ranging livestock. Some of the human considerations we need to look at when we're talking about kaput and using kaput. It is harmful if consumed. Don't consume it. Don't eat the blue bait. It is a very nice color of blue so that it tells you not to eat it. If you do, call poison control. It can be treated by vitamin K1 by a medical professional. And then also when we're using the bait, when we're handling it or putting it out, we want to wear some of that basic personal protective equipment, long sleeves, pants, gloves, and closed-toed shoes. Again, it is a pesticide. We want to make sure that we're not ingesting it, getting it on us, things like that. Some of the non-target species consideration. So this is going to be talking about like native animals, livestock, things like that. The primary toxicity for this bait is through direct consumption, which if you use this bait exactly as it's prescribed in the label, you should have no consumption by animals other than pigs. It is a low toxicity bait. It is designed to be chronically toxic, not acutely toxic. This is important to remember. This is not a bait that you put out for one day and then it kills all the pigs you have after they eat it. This is a chronically toxic bait, which means it can take 5 to 8 feedings roughly by each pig before it actually works. And in recent field trials by Symmetrics Limited Corp., which is the company that owns Kaput, found no non-target deaths. I mean, when used correctly, as put on by the label, they didn't find any other animal besides pigs who died from the bait. To give you a couple of ideas of what this would look like in other species, for a dog, a single feeding of 88 pounds is what would be required to acutely kill a dog. The chronic dose is 13.2 pounds per day for 5 days. So that's a lot of this feed that they would have to consume. A cow, a chronic dose is 3,520 pounds per day for 5 days. That's more of the bait than you'll probably ever put out at one time, or should put out at one time. A turkey's chronic dose is 29.3 pounds per day for 19 days, and a northern bobwhite's chronic dose is 27.6 pounds. This is all information that was done, we found through studies of Meehan in 1984 and Symmetrics in 2022. Some more considerations. Again, for secondary toxicity, consumption of a carcass that was killed by the toxic bait. This bait, warfarin, quickly metabolizes in the system. Again, it is not an acute toxicant, so it takes multiple feedings of this to actually work. What that tells us is that scavengers should be safe if they are eating pigs that were killed by this bait. What they found through other studies was that a lethal dose for a dog, if a dog was to get into a carcass, would be a 20-pound dog would have to consume 136 pounds of infected liver. And liver is where most of the toxicant is going to be held in the animal in a single feeding. Through other studies of warfarin, they found warfarin that was at 10 times the dose that is in this bait. Killed rats, was fed to magpies, did nothing to the magpies. Again, warfarin 10X killed prairie dogs. They fed those prairie dogs to European ferrets, no effects. And then warfarin at 5 times the dose that this bait is, killed rats, was fed to alligators, and had no effects. We get all of that information from 3 studies, one by Richard Pochet in 2018, one by Symmetrics in 2022, and one by Meehan in 1984. Some of the safety precautions taken with this bait. The actual toxic bait has a blue dye in the bait. That blue dye will be visible within 3 hours of first bait consumption. And what they found in the Texas A&M study is that it wasn't just the fat that got dyed blue. It was all the ligaments, the joints, all the fluids in the body. That blue dye remains for roughly 2 to 3 weeks after the last consumption of the bait. So while the Texas A&M study only had 1 incident of a sublethal dose, and that was because they had to end the study early. There was no other incidences of any pigs getting a sublethal dose, meaning they ate some of the bait and then they decided not to eat it anymore and lived. But even if that was to happen, that blue dye will remain for 2 to 3 weeks after last consumption. And then again, it's in the fatty tissues, fluids, and joints. So the Texas study, it was done in multiple regions on 23 sites in 10 counties. With this study, the landowners or a hired professional by the landowner was the person actually putting the bait out and running the bait site. They did this over multiple seasons, And if I could boil the whole study down to one single sentence, they found that it works, but only when you follow the protocol exactly. So the better you are at following the protocol, the more successful you will be in the use of this bait. So on to the feeder we talked about. You do need to use a species-specific feeder when using this bait. You don't necessarily have to use the feeder that is sold with the bait that you'll see. It's called a hog stopper. But the bait cannot be placed on the ground. The feeder that you use must have at least a 17-pound door so that only a pig can open that door to access the feed. And the door must be capable of being put at a half stop, so half open, to properly do the conditioning. So we're going to talk about the pre-baiting, so the conditioning portion of using Kaput. Again, like we talked about with trapping, like I talked about earlier, if you want to be successful with any method, especially this method, you have to put in the pre-work. So for Kaput, you would bait with 100% corn for 1 week with the feeder door fully open. So basically what you're doing is you're saying, hey pigs, I have food here. I want you to eat it out of this feeder. Now if everything goes perfect, once you have a week of the pigs actively using the feeder, you go to step 2, which is bait with 75% corn and 25% placebo for 1 week with the feeder door half open. One thing I will point out about this, we have some of the placebo bait here that I'll open up after my talk if anyone wants to check it out. The placebo bait, as far as we know as today, may not be widely available. So if it's not available to you in your area, you don't have to use the placebo. You would just use 100% corn. And you want to have that door at half open so that the pig gets used to opening the door some. Again, if everything goes perfect and they do that for a week straight, you can move on to step 3, which is 50% corn and 50% placebo for 1 week with feeder door still half open. Again, if you don't have access to the placebo, you can still use 100% corn. And then you'll go to a bait with 50% corn and 50% placebo for 1 week with feeder door closed all the way. And you want to make sure that they're actively using that feeder door, opening it up. So that's where the surveillance comes in handy. And that's also where trail cameras can come in handy. If you set a trail camera up at the bait site, it'll tell you if the pigs are actively using it. And then the biggest indication that the pigs are actively using it is the feed gone. Now, this may sound like a fast process, but what they found in the study is it can be 8 weeks or greater from time of putting the first feeder out there till the time of starting the toxic bait. Because again, if we want to be successful about this, we have to train that sounder to properly use that feeder, which means they're going to open it, they're going to feed from it, allow it to close, open it again, feed from it. Successful pre-baiting looks like the pigs being regularly at the feeder, operating the door, and the feeder needs to be filled because bait is being consumed. Another thing they found in the study is that you have to constantly keep that feeder full. If you let that feeder go dry, even for a day, there is a chance that you'll have to restart the conditioning all over. If the pigs come to the feeder and there's no food in it, there's a chance, and they have seen it happen, that the pigs get disinterested, move off, and you have to work them back in. Toxic baiting. Here's the big thing when we talk about toxic baiting. This bait should not be mixed with the placebo or the corn. Once you move on to the toxic baiting portion of this, that feeder should have nothing but the toxic bait. If you get a chance to come up and look at the placebo looks exactly the same like those little bricks as the toxic bait. The only difference is it's not blue. When you're using the toxic bait, the door on the feeder must be kept closed at all times so that no other species can get to it. This is another reason why surveillance is so important. Pigs are not exactly nice to our equipment. They can break the feeder, cause the feeder to be stuck open. So especially when we're using toxic bait, we need to be surveilling it, looking at the trail camera pictures to ensure that that feeder is functioning properly. You're going to fill it with 100% toxic bait, and you need to use the bait for at least 3 weeks or until you see no more pigs. And then once feeder use stops, meaning the bait isn't disappearing anymore, you're not seeing pigs on the camera, you're not seeing pigs when you go out to check on it, you can go to the next step. And that final step is post-baiting. In post-baiting, you remove all of the toxic bait. You put 100% corn in it for roughly about 10 days. You keep the door closed. And the reason you want to keep the door closed is because as we're watching it, as we're doing the post-baiting, we want to see, one, did we get all of the pigs that were coming in? And one of the ways we know if a pig is still alive after we've done the toxic bait is if they can readily use the feeder door. So if a pig comes in and readily just opens that door and starts eating, it means you might have missed a pig during your toxic baiting. But if a sounder comes in and can't figure out how to open the door, then it means possibly a new set of pigs have come in. And this will allow managers, again, to monitor any of remaining hogs in the area. So, from the Texas A&M study, when did it work and when did it fail? When it worked was when the landowner or whoever the baiter was invested time in good conditioning. So they did every one of those steps right and put the time into it. They never let the feeders go empty. They checked on the feeders. They surveilled the area every 2 to 4 days. And realistically, especially in the early process of this, you want to try to get out there once a day. The use of game cameras. So having a game camera on the bait site to know when pigs are coming. Are they properly using the feeder? How many pigs are coming? And the biggest thing is do not harass the feral pigs around the bait site. So if you read the study that is publicly available, you'll see that they had one area where the pigs got so used to the feeder that they were basically sleeping all day at the feeder, and either the landowner or one of his representatives came in and was like, well, shoot, this is a pretty good chance to get some pigs off the ground. And they shot several of the pigs, the rest ran off and never came back to the bait site. When it failed, when there's abundant alternative feed. So if we're in the middle of growing season and there's corn everywhere, you might not be able to train them to come into the bait site. Inconsistent baiting. So again, if you're letting that feeder go empty, if you're not checking it enough, keeping it full, that can cause issues and failure. And then lack of conditioning or harassing feral pigs at bait sites. Some of the additional considerations we want to talk about is weather. We did find that bait stored in high heat may melt together. It is still usable. Just make sure you break it up before you put it in the feeder. And then heavy rainfall, obviously nothing's perfect. Heavy rainfall can cause the toxic bait to spoil. And what they found was that pigs will not eat the spoiled bait. They might eat spoiled corn. They will not eat the spoiled bait. So if that is to happen, you want to clean the feeder out completely and put new bait in it. And then feeder maintenance. Nothing will last forever. It's in the Texas weather and it's being used by pigs. So making sure that we have proper feeder maintenance is essential for not only the success of taking pigs off the property, but to make sure that non-target species don't get access to the bait. And then some final takeaways. Kaput is another valuable tool in our toolbox. As I said in the beginning, all of these are tools in a toolbox. There are multiple methods for managing feral pigs. No one method is going to be perfect for every landowner, but the combination of methods will improve all of our ability to remove feral pigs off of the landscape. Here's a couple of resources we have available for any other questions. We have our website. We have 2 different YouTube channels. So we have the Extension YouTube channel, and then we have the Natural Resource Institute YouTube channel. Then our AgriLife bookstore, and then we have a Feral Hog Facebook page. And finally, I'll leave you with, this is my contact information. If you ever have questions, need help, anything like that, please feel free, email, call me. I'm always happy to talk with landowners. If there are any questions, I'd be more than glad to answer them to the best that I can. Yes, sir. It's a standard applicator license, but the manufacturer training is specifically required by Kaput. Yes. So, unlike the past label, when this was first introduced in Texas some years ago, there is no longer a recovery requirement in as you have to recover every pig that you killed. There is still that surveillance requirement, and you still do have to recover and properly dispose of the carcasses that you do find. And that proper disposal is through state laws, which is determined by TDA and Texas Animal Health Commission. Yes, sir. We do not have that. So when the study was done, the bait was given to us by Kaput. We weren't told what the bait was going to be priced at once it was released onto the market. It is currently available on the market in Texas. Kaput is not advertising the vendors that are selling it. So my best advice to you is to either call the vendor you currently purchase pesticides from and ask them if they have it, or you can call Kaput, and Kaput will tell you the closest vendor to you that has it. And the vendor is also who you will get the manufacturer required training through. Any other questions? Oh, that slide? So that is a great question over here about, so it is important to note wild pigs have a large home range. There is a chance that if you use the pesticide on your property, the pigs could die on your neighbor's property. Anything that comes of that will be up to TDA. They are the regulatory agency behind this, but it might be worth it to call your neighbors and let them know that you are planning on using Kaput and that they may happen. Again, with the blue dye in the fat, it does provide safety if that were to happen and a landowner comes up on a pig and finds it. It's very evident. On some pigs, you can even see the blue dye through the skin. Yes, sir. That is a great question, sir. And that is a question for TDA and Texas Animal Health Commission. So unfortunately, we are not a regulatory agency. We're an educational agency. The label says it must be disposed of per state laws. Texas Animal Health Commission has a couple different disposal techniques depending on what kind of livestock it is and what whether it's diseased or not diseased. And so the proper disposal, for best information on that, I would ask my local TDA rep.